I never expected a bunch of free flowers to completely change my life. At first, I thought the florist downstairs was just being nice. Then I thought he felt sorry for me. Then I started wondering if maybe he was flirting. And once that idea got stuck in my head, I couldn't get rid of it. The whole thing started 3 months after I moved into a small apartment on the edge of downtown. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place above a bakery and across the street from a tiny flower shop called Petals and Pine. The florist was a guy named Paul. The first time I saw him, he was carrying a huge bucket of sunflowers out onto the sidewalk. I remember almost walking straight into him because I was staring at my phone. "Careful," he laughed. I jumped back. "Sorry." He smiled. "No casualties. We're good." That was it. A 10-second interaction. But for some reason, I noticed him after that. Maybe because I walked past the shop every day. Maybe because he always seemed happy. Or maybe because he was ridiculously attractive. Not model attractive. Real attractive. The kind of guy who looked good without trying. Dark hair, warm brown eyes, a little scruff, usually wearing rolled up sleeves and an apron covered in flower petals. I learned pretty quickly that everyone in the neighborhood loved him. Old ladies stopped to chat, kids waved at him, dog owners treated his shop like a community center, and Paul somehow remembered every single person's name. Meanwhile, I was the complete opposite. My name's Hayden, 28, graphic designer, work from home, social life hanging on by a thread. Most days consisted of sitting in front of a computer for 10 hours and ordering takeout. Exciting stuff. So whenever I passed the flower shop, Paul usually looked like he was living in an entirely different world, one that involved sunlight and actual human interaction. The first free flower happened on a Tuesday. I was walking home with groceries when Paul stepped out of the shop. "Hey, Hayden." The fact that he knew my name immediately caught me off guard. Hey." He held out a single yellow tulip. This one got bent during delivery. I looked at the flower, then at him, then back at the flower. "Okay." He laughed. "Take it." "You sure? Unless you think I'm trying to scam you." I couldn't help smiling. That's exactly what I think. Then my evil plan has failed. I took the tulip. "Thanks." "No problem." And that was that. Just one flower. Except the next week, it happened again. This time it was a white daisy. A few days later, a pink carnation. Then a small bundle of lavender. Always with some casual explanation. Wrong order. Extra stems. Can't sell these tomorrow. Eventually, I stopped questioning it. I'd walk past the shop. Paul would wave me over, and somehow I'd end up carrying flowers home. My apartment started looking like a botanical garden, which was funny because I had never bought flowers for myself in my life. One Friday afternoon, I was arranging some of them in a glass jar when my friend Marcus came over. He stared at the kitchen counter, then at me, then back at the flowers. "Did you get dumped?" "What? Why do you suddenly own more flowers than my grandmother?" I laughed. "The florist gives them to me." Marcus froze. "The florist?" "Yeah." "The hot florist?" I rolled my eyes. "Apparently." Marcus pointed dramatically toward the window. "The hot florist gives you flowers. They're leftovers." "Sure. They are." "Hayden." "What?" "No straight man accidentally gives another guy flowers 3 times a week." I nearly choked on my drink. Who said he's straight? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who said he's gay? Fair point. I actually had no idea. I'd never seen him with a boyfriend, or a girlfriend, or anyone. Still, the thought lingered, especially after Marcus left. Because once someone suggests a possibility, it's hard not to think about it. The next morning, I walked past the shop again. Paul was outside arranging buckets of roses. He looked up immediately. Morning. Morning. He grabbed a small bouquet from the display. Before I could say anything, he handed it to me. There were soft blue flowers mixed with white ones. Honestly, they looked expensive. Paul, hmm? You know you're creating a weird situation, right? He smiled. How so? I held up the bouquet. Normal people don't get this many free flowers. His eyes stayed on mine for just a second longer than necessary. Then he shrugged. Maybe I like seeing them in your apartment window. That answer hit me harder than it should have, because suddenly I imagined him looking up at my apartment, noticing the flowers, thinking about me, which was probably ridiculous, but my stomach still did a weird little flip. Paul seemed completely unaware of the effect he'd had. He adjusted one of the rose buckets. So are you doing anything fun this weekend? Working. That's depressing. Thank you. I'm serious. I laughed. He grinned. Then a customer walked up, forcing him back into work mode. See you later, Hayden. Yeah, I started walking away, but I could feel myself smiling the entire way home. That should have been my first clue, because somewhere between the tulips and the daisies and the casual conversations, I had started looking forward to seeing him. Every day. And once that happened, things got a lot more complicated. Over the next few weeks, seeing Paul became part of my routine. Wake up, work, grab coffee, walk past the flower shop, talk to Paul, repeat. It wasn't intentional. At least that's what I told myself. But somehow my errands always seemed to line up with times when he was outside. And apparently, he noticed. One afternoon, I stepped out of the bakery carrying a coffee when I heard his voice. You're stalking me. I nearly spilled my drink. Paul was standing in his doorway with his arms crossed. What? He pointed at me. Third time today. This is literally where I live. Convenient excuse. I laughed. You think the entire apartment lease was part of some elaborate plan? I'm keeping an open mind. His grin made it impossible not to smile back. That was becoming a problem. The smiling. The way my mood improved whenever I saw him. The way I found myself looking out my apartment window to see if he was working. The way I noticed things about him. Little things. The fact that he always tucked a pencil behind his ear while arranging bouquets. The tiny scar above his eyebrow. The way he bit the inside of his cheek whenever he concentrated. I knew way too much for someone who was supposedly just the florist downstairs. One evening, I was finishing work when my phone buzzed. Marcus. Marcus, are you finally dating Flower Boy? Me. No. Marcus. Coward. Me. We're friends. Marcus. Sure. Me. We are. Then why do you smile every time his name comes up? I didn't answer, because honestly, I wasn't sure anymore. The worst part was that Paul never gave me enough information to figure out what was happening. Sometimes he seemed openly flirtatious. Other times, he acted completely normal. For example, on Wednesday, he called me handsome. On Thursday, he spent 20 minutes telling me about fertilizer. There was no consistency. My confusion reached a new level when he invited me inside the shop after closing. It happened completely by accident. At least, I think it did. A storm rolled through the city one night. Heavy rain, strong wind, the kind of weather that made people sprint between buildings. I was coming home with an umbrella when I noticed Paul struggling to bring in a display stand. Without thinking, I jogged over. Need help? He looked relieved. Actually, yes. The wind nearly knocked over a bucket of flowers. Together, we dragged everything inside. By the time we finished, both of us were soaked. Rainwater dripped from my hair. Paul looked at me and laughed. You look terrible. Thanks. You somehow made things worse. I was helping. Debatable. I shook my head, then glanced around. It was my first time really being inside the shop. The place looked completely different after hours. Without customers, it felt peaceful. Warm lights, fresh flowers everywhere. The smell was incredible. Soft music played from somewhere in the back. For a moment, I forgot about the rain completely. Paul noticed me looking around. First time inside? Yeah. What do you think? I turned slowly. It's actually beautiful. His expression softened. That look lasted only a second, but I noticed it. Then he smiled. Want coffee? I should have said no. Instead, I said yes immediately. 10 minutes later, we were sitting at a small table near the back of the shop. Rain hammered against the windows. The shop was officially closed. And somehow it felt less like talking to a florist and more like something else, something personal. We talked for almost 2 hours about work, family, movies, travel. The conversation flowed so naturally that I lost track of time. I learned that Paul was 30, that he'd owned the shop for 4 years, that he'd almost become an architect before changing careers entirely. At one point, he laughed and rubbed his forehead. My parents still haven't forgiven me. For owning a successful business? They wanted stability. You own a flower shop that's been here for years. Exactly. I laughed. They're ridiculous. Thank you. The conversation eventually drifted toward dating, which immediately made me nervous. Not because of the topic, because of him. Paul leaned back in his chair. So? So? You seeing anyone? My pulse jumped. No. Really? Really. He looked genuinely surprised. How? What does that mean? He shrugged. You're attractive. For a second, my brain completely stopped working. Just stopped. No thoughts. Nothing. Paul seemed unaware of the damage he'd done. He sipped his coffee casually. Meanwhile, I was trying to remember how breathing worked. Finally, I managed. Thanks. His eyes met mine. You're welcome. The silence afterward felt different. Not awkward. Just aware. Like we both noticed something. The rain outside continued pouring. Neither of us looked away. Then the front door rattled from a gust of wind. The moment broke instantly. Paul stood up. I should probably lock that. I nodded. Probably. But my heart wouldn't slow down. Because for the first time, I wasn't imagining things. At least I didn't think I was. The compliment felt intentional. The look felt intentional. Everything about that conversation felt intentional. When I finally left the shop later that night, the rain had stopped. The sidewalks glistened under streetlights. The city felt unusually quiet. Paul walked me to the door. Thanks for helping. No problem. And thanks for the company. I smiled. Anytime. For a moment, neither of us moved, just standing there, close enough that I noticed the faint scent of flowers and coffee on his clothes, close enough that I became painfully aware of how attractive he was. Then Paul smiled, a small one, the kind that felt genuine. I'm glad you moved into this neighborhood, Hayden. My chest tightened, and suddenly those free flowers didn't feel random anymore. After that night in the flower shop, everything changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough that I couldn't pretend anymore. Before, Paul had been the florist I talked to. Now he was the first person I wanted to tell things to. And apparently, the feeling went both ways. The text started a few days later. It began with a photo, a sunflower wearing sunglasses. At least, that's what it looked like. Paul, found your twin. I stared at my phone, then laughed. Me, rude. Paul, accurate. Me, I don't even know what that means. Paul, neither do I. That somehow became our thing. Random messages, photos, jokes, comments throughout the day. Nothing serious, but constant. Soon it became normal to wake up and see a text from him. Normal to exchange messages during lunch. Normal to talk before bed. One Friday evening, I was working late when my phone buzzed. Paul, look outside. I walked to my apartment window. Paul was standing on the sidewalk below, holding a giant bouquet over his head, like some ridiculous romantic comedy. I immediately started laughing. He looked up and pointed dramatically at the flowers, then at me, then made a heart shape with his hands. My stomach practically launched itself into orbit. A second later, my phone buzzed again. Paul, customer canceled. Paul, thought you'd appreciate them. I texted back. Me, you're insane. Paul, thank you. 5 minutes later, he was standing outside my apartment door, holding the bouquet, smiling like an idiot. And somehow, I smiled right back. That was becoming dangerous. Very dangerous. Because every time I convinced myself we were just friends, Paul would do something that completely destroyed that theory. Like remembering tiny details. One afternoon, I casually mentioned loving homemade cookies. 3 days later, he showed up with cookies. Another time, I mentioned being stressed about work. The next morning, there was coffee waiting outside my door. No note, no explanation, just coffee exactly how I liked it. When I confronted him, he shrugged. You look tired. Paul, what? That's weird. It's thoughtful. It's weirdly thoughtful. He looks pleased with himself, which honestly made things worse. The problem was that I was falling for him, hard, and I didn't know if he felt the same way. Some days I was certain. Other days, I convinced myself I was imagining everything. Then came Saturday, the farmer's market, the day that completely ruined my ability to think rationally. I had planned on grabbing vegetables and going home. Simple, easy. Instead, I ran into Paul, literally. I turned a corner carrying coffee and nearly crashed into him. Whoa! Sorry, he laughed. Are you always this clumsy? Only around florists. Good answer. He was wearing jeans and a dark green sweater. No apron, no shop, no flowers, just Paul. And somehow, seeing him outside his usual environment felt different, more personal, more real. What are you doing here? I asked. He held up a paper bag. Shopping. I blinked. You're telling me florists require food? Occasionally. Interesting. Scientific fact. We ended up walking through the market together, then grabbing lunch, then coffee, then somehow spending almost the entire afternoon together. Neither of us seemed interested in ending it. At one point, we found ourselves sitting on a bench overlooking the river. The sun was beginning to set. People wandered past us. The city glowed orange and gold. Paul leaned back. Can I ask you something? Sure. When was your last relationship? The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. About 2 years ago. He nodded slowly. Serious? Yeah. What happened? I looked out at the water. It ended. Insightful. I laughed. He moved away. Paul was quiet for a moment. Then, that must have been hard. Yeah. A breeze moved through the trees. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I gathered enough courage to ask, what about you? Paul's expression shifted, not dramatically, just enough. My last relationship ended about a year ago. I glanced at him. Bad breakup? Not exactly. His voice sounded distant. He just didn't want the same things. Something about the way he said it made me look at him more closely. Then it hit me. The word. He. Not she. He. My heart skipped so hard it genuinely hurt. Paul noticed my expression immediately. A slow smile appeared. There it is. There what is? The realization. I felt heat rush into my face. Oh. Yeah. Oh. His smile widened. Cute. Stop. You're blushing. I am not. You absolutely are. I buried my face in my hands. Paul laughed. Actually laughed. And somehow that sound made me even more embarrassed. When I finally looked up again, he was still smiling. But there was something softer in his eyes now. Something warm. Something that made my chest feel tight. You didn't know? He asked. No. I thought it was obvious. It wasn't. Hayden. What? I own a flower shop. I started laughing immediately. So that's your evidence? It's pretty compelling evidence. We both laughed. The tension dissolved, but underneath it, something new had appeared. Something undeniable. For the first time, neither of us had to wonder. At least not about that. Paul was gay. Paul was single. And Paul was sitting beside me, looking at me in a way that definitely didn't feel platonic. The realization should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything harder. Because now there were no excuses left. No uncertainty. No convenient misunderstandings. Now I had to face the possibility that I genuinely liked him. And even more terrifying, he might actually like me too. As the sun disappeared behind the buildings, Paul nudged my shoulder. A simple touch, casual, friendly, yet somehow it sent electricity through me. He didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. For one brief moment, we simply sat there, close, comfortable, aware of each other. And something told me neither of us wanted the day to end. The problem with realizing someone likes you back is that suddenly every interaction feels different. Every smile means more. Every glance lasts longer. Every touch becomes impossible to ignore. That was exactly what happened with Paul. After our conversation by the river, neither of us addressed it directly, but something had shifted. The teasing became more obvious. The texts became more personal. And I started catching him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. One Monday morning, I walked into the bakery before work. When I came back outside, Paul was waiting near the flower shop, holding a single white rose. I stopped walking. "Oh no," he smiled. "Oh yes." "Paul, Hayden, you can't just stand here looking like you're proposing." His grin widened. "Can I at least finish my dramatic entrance?" "No." "Rude." I laughed despite myself, then took the rose. The smile he gave me afterward made my stomach flip. Again, everything seemed to make my stomach flip lately. That afternoon, I spent almost an hour trying to focus on work. Instead, I kept thinking about him, about the way he looked at me, about the conversation by the river, about the fact that for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about someone. My phone buzzed. "Paul, important question." "Me." "Okay." "Paul, favorite movie." "Me." "That's your important question?" "Paul, extremely important." "Me." "Why?" Three dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Paul, research." I laughed. "Me, the secret life of Walter Mitty." A minute later, "Paul, good choice." "Me, why were you asking?" "Paul, research." "Me, you're impossible." "Paul, thank you." 2 days later, he invited me over for dinner. Not as a date, at least neither of us called it that, but it definitely felt like one. Paul lived above the flower shop in a renovated loft apartment. I'd never been inside before. The place suited him perfectly. Warm lighting, books everywhere, plants covering almost every available surface, and flowers, obviously. So many flowers. I stood in the doorway looking around. "This is ridiculous." "What? You live inside a greenhouse." Paul laughed. "I know. I'm surprised birds don't live here. They pay rent." Fair. The evening started casually. Dinner, wine, conversation. Easy, comfortable, exactly like it always was with him. But underneath everything ran a current of nervous energy, at least on my side. Because every time he smiled at me, I forgot what I was saying. Every time our eyes met, my heart sped up. At one point, we were cleaning dishes together, a task that should have been completely normal. Instead, it felt weirdly intimate. Paul washed. I dried. Our shoulders occasionally bumped. Neither of us moved away. Then he handed me a plate. Our fingers touched, just briefly, but the moment stretched. Paul looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet, very small, very aware. Then his phone rang. The moment shattered instantly. Paul groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." He answered. I focused very intensely on drying a perfectly dry plate, trying not to think about what had almost happened, because something had almost happened. I was sure of it. The rest of the evening passed normally, mostly. But when I finally left, Paul walked me downstairs. We stopped outside the building entrance. The street was quiet, the city settling into night. Neither of us seemed eager to leave. "Thanks for dinner," I said. "Thanks for coming." A pause, then another. Paul shoved his hands into his pockets. "I had fun." I smiled. "Me too." More silence. The dangerous kind. The kind where both people are thinking the same thing. My pulse hammered. Paul looked at me. Really looked at me. And for a second, I thought he was going to kiss me. I genuinely thought it. The distance between us felt tiny. His eyes dropped briefly toward my mouth, then returned to mine. The air felt electric. Then a car horn sounded somewhere down the street. Paul blinked. The moment vanished. Just like that. Good night, Hayden. Good night. I walked home feeling simultaneously thrilled and frustrated because we were so close, and yet neither of us had actually done anything. The next week became unbearable, not in a bad way, in the way that happens when two people clearly want something but are too cautious to make the first move. Even Marcus noticed. You look ridiculous. I frowned. What does that mean? It means you're smiling at your phone. I looked down. Paul had just sent me a picture of a dog wearing a flower crown. Marcus pointed dramatically. Exactly. You're overreacting. Hayden. What? Ask him out. I sighed. No. Why? What if I'm wrong? Marcus stared at me, then laughed. Actually laughed. Wrong? Yes. The florist who gives you flowers. Yes. The florist who texts you every day. Yes. The florist who made you dinner. Yes. The florist who literally looks at you like you're his favorite person. I rubbed my face. Marcus shook his head. I cannot help you. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being ridiculous. Because the signs were obvious. At least to everyone except me. Then, Friday happened. And suddenly there was no room left for doubt. Late that evening, a thunderstorm rolled through the city. Not as bad as the previous one. Just enough rain to send everyone indoors. I was sitting on my couch watching a movie when someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened it. Paul stood there, holding flowers, of course. But this time wasn't like the others, because he looked nervous, actually nervous. Hey, hey. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he held out the bouquet. Dark red roses mixed with white flowers. Beautiful. These aren't leftovers, I said quietly. No. My heart started racing. Paul took a breath, then smiled. A small, nervous smile. The kind I'd never seen from him before. Hayden, I was wondering if maybe you'd like to have dinner with me tomorrow. I stared at him, my brain taking several seconds to process the question. Then, like a date? His smile grew. Yeah. My chest felt ready to explode, because after months of flowers and conversations and almost moments, Paul was finally asking. And there was only one answer I wanted to give. For a second, I just stared at him. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I couldn't believe he was actually asking. After all the flowers, all the conversations, all the almost kisses, it was finally happening. Paul looked nervous, which somehow made him even more attractive. Hayden? I realized I still hadn't answered. Right. Words. Those were important. Yes. His eyebrows lifted. Yes? Yes. I'd like to go on a date with you. The smile that appeared on his face was worth every second of confusion I'd suffered over the previous months. It wasn't his usual playful grin. This one was different. Genuine. Relieved. Happy. And seeing it made me feel exactly the same way. Good, he said. Good? Good. I laughed. You're very eloquent. I was nervous. That surprised me. You? Believe it or not. I shook my head. I don't buy it. Paul laughed, then looked down at the bouquet still sitting between us. Well, well, I should probably let you enjoy your flowers. I smiled. They're beautiful. His eyes met mine. Yeah. The way he said it made my pulse jump. And suddenly, I was very aware that we were standing close together. Again, always somehow ending up close together. Neither of us moved. The silence stretched. Warm, comfortable. Then Paul glanced toward the hallway. Tomorrow at 7? 7 works. Perfect. He started backing away, still smiling. I was smiling too, like an idiot. Actually worse than an idiot. I closed my apartment door and immediately leaned against it, my heart pounding. A date, an actual date, with Paul, the florist, the guy who had somehow become the best part of my day. I spent the next 24 hours being completely useless. Work? Impossible. Concentration? Gone. Marcus called that afternoon. The second I answered, he knew. You finally did it. I laughed. How do you know? Because you sound disgustingly happy. That's fair. So? So what? Tell me everything. I ended up giving him the entire story. By the end, Marcus sounded personally offended. I cannot believe it took this long. Neither can I. You two have been dating emotionally for months. That wasn't entirely wrong. Saturday evening arrived painfully slowly. By 6:30, I had already changed shirts 3 times. By 6:45, I was pacing. By 6:50, I considered canceling due to nervousness. At 6:55, my phone buzzed. Paul, don't panic. I immediately laughed. Me, how do you know I'm panicking? Paul, because I am too. Somehow that made me feel better. At exactly 7, I walked downstairs. Paul was waiting outside the flower shop, and for a moment, I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Usually I saw him in aprons and rolled sleeves. Tonight, he was wearing a dark jacket over a black shirt. Simple, effortless, dangerously handsome. His expression changed the moment he saw me, a slow smile appearing. Wow, my face immediately warmed. What? You look incredible. I laughed nervously. You're starting strong. I'm just being honest. The date itself was surprisingly easy. Not because I wasn't nervous, because Paul made it impossible to stay nervous for long. We went to a small Italian restaurant a few blocks away. Nothing fancy, just cozy, quiet, perfect. The conversation flowed exactly like it always did, except now there was something underneath it, something neither of us had to pretend wasn't there. Halfway through dinner, Paul rested his chin on his hand and smiled. What? He shrugged. Nothing. Paul, what? You're staring. I know. I nearly choked on my drink. His grin widened. You're cute when you're flustered. You're impossible. Also true. For the first time, neither of us hid the flirting. And honestly, it felt amazing. By the time dinner ended, neither of us seemed ready for the night to be over. So we walked. No destination, just wandering through the city, talking, laughing, enjoying being together. Eventually, we ended up near the river where we'd sat a few weeks earlier. The same bench was empty. Paul pointed. Full circle. I smiled. We sat down. The city lights reflected across the water. A cool breeze drifted through the air. For a while, neither of us spoke. Not because things were awkward, because they weren't. For the first time in a long time, everything felt simple. Then Paul broke the silence. You know what I liked about you first? I looked over. What? He smiled. You always looked lonely. I blinked. That wasn't the answer I expected. Paul immediately laughed. That came out wrong. A little. He rubbed his forehead. What I mean is, every time I saw you walking past the shop, You always looked like you carried everything yourself. I listened quietly. Paul looked out toward the water. You'd smile and be friendly, but there was always this distance. His voice softened. I wanted to know you. Something tightened in my chest, because nobody had ever described me that accurately. Paul glanced back at me, and then I did. For a moment, neither of us moved. The city faded into the background. The river, the traffic, the people. None of it seemed important. Just him. Just us. Paul's eyes dropped briefly toward my mouth, then returned to mine. My pulse immediately accelerated. There it was again. That feeling. That moment. Only this time, neither of us looked away. Neither of us got interrupted. Neither of us pretended. Slowly, carefully, Paul moved closer, giving me every chance to stop him. I didn't, not even a little. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Can I kiss you?" The question sent warmth rushing through me. I smiled. "Please." And then he did. Soft, gentle, perfect. The kind of kiss that somehow feels both brand new and familiar at the same time. The kind that makes the entire world disappear for a few seconds. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were smiling, neither trying to hide it, neither able to. Paul laughed quietly. "What?" He shook his head. "I should have done that weeks ago. I couldn't help laughing. Months ago." "Fair." Then he reached for my hand. And for the first time, I let myself believe this wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was real. The funny thing about finally kissing someone you've wanted to kiss for months is that afterward, everything feels different. And at the same time, exactly the same. Paul and I sat on that bench for another hour, talking, laughing, holding hands like neither of us wanted to let go. Every now and then, I'd catch myself smiling for no reason. Then I'd look over and realize Paul was doing the exact same thing. Eventually, he shook his head. "What?" He laughed. "I can't believe that worked." "What worked?" "The flowers." I stared at him. "The flowers?" "Yeah." I laughed immediately. "You had a plan?" "Of course I had a plan." "Paul." "What?" "You spent months giving me flowers." His grin grew. "I did." "That's insane." "It was romantic. It was weird. It was effective." I couldn't even argue. Because unfortunately, he was right. Very right. The walk home felt surreal. Every now and then our shoulders brushed. Every now and then our hands found each other again. The city looked exactly the same as it always had, yet everything felt brighter, lighter, like something had finally clicked into place. When we reached our block, we stopped outside the flower shop. Neither of us seemed eager to say goodnight. Paul leaned against the window. So, so, we're doing this?" I smiled. "I think we are." His expression softened. "Good." That simple word somehow made my chest ache, in the best possible way. Then he stepped closer. Not much, just enough, and kissed me again. This one shorter, easier, less nervous. The kind of kiss that already felt familiar. When he pulled back, both of us were smiling. Again, constantly. It was becoming a problem. "Good night, Hayden." "Good night, Paul." I floated upstairs. There is no other word for it. Floated. The next morning, I woke up expecting it to feel unreal. Instead, It felt right. My phone buzzed. A message from Paul. Paul, morning. Me, morning. 3 dots appeared. Paul, still smiling? I laughed. Me, maybe. Paul, same. The relationship developed naturally after that. There was no awkward transition, no uncertainty. We already knew each other, already trusted each other, already wanted to spend time together. The only difference was that now we could stop pretending. A week later, I was working from home when someone knocked on my door. I opened it. Paul stood there holding a bouquet. I immediately started laughing. No. Yes. We're dating now. I know. You don't have to keep bringing me flowers. He handed them over. I want to. I took them, still smiling. Then noticed something. The flowers were different. Not random, not leftovers. Carefully chosen. Every stem arranged perfectly. I looked up. Paul looked suddenly self-conscious. Too much? No. My voice came out quieter than expected. No, they're perfect. The relief on his face was immediate, and for some reason, that made me love them even more. As summer continued, our lives blended together naturally. Dinner became normal. Movie nights became normal. Morning coffee became normal. Sometimes I'd work from the small table in the corner of his shop. Customers quickly started noticing. One elderly woman looked between us and smiled knowingly. About time, Paul nearly dropped an entire bucket of lilies. I laughed so hard I couldn't breathe. The neighborhood seemed oddly invested in our relationship, probably because everyone had apparently noticed what we were doing long before we did. One afternoon, a bakery employee handed me a cookie. Congratulations. For what? She pointed toward the flower shop. For finally figuring it out. Apparently, the entire block had been watching us stumble around for months. Humiliating, but also kind of funny. The best part wasn't the dates, or the kisses, or even the flowers. It was the quiet moments, the ordinary moments. One rainy evening, we sat together in his apartment reading, not talking, just existing in the same space. At one point, I looked up from my book. Paul was sitting across from me, focused, peaceful, comfortable. And the realization hit me unexpectedly. I was happy, truly happy. Not excited, not distracted, happy. The kind that settles deep inside you. The kind that feels stable, safe. When he noticed me staring, he raised an eyebrow. What? I smiled. Nothing. His eyes narrowed. You're doing that thing. What thing? The thing where you're secretly having thoughts. I laughed. Maybe. Should I be concerned? No. He set his book down. Tell me. I hesitated, then shrugged. I was just thinking about how weird this is. His forehead creased. Weird? Good weird. I looked around the apartment, at the plants, the flowers, the warm lights, then back at him. A year ago, I didn't even know you. Paul's expression softened immediately. I continued, and now I can't imagine my life without you in it. The room became very quiet, not awkward, just full of everything neither of us quite knew how to express. Paul stood, walked over, then leaned down and kissed the top of my head. A simple gesture, but somehow it affected me more than any dramatic declaration could have. When I looked up, his eyes were warm, steady, certain, and for the first time I saw something there that felt bigger than attraction, bigger than excitement, something deeper, something lasting, something that scared me a little, because I was starting to realize this wasn't just the beginning of a relationship. It might be the beginning of something much bigger. The first time I realized I was in love with Paul, I didn't tell him. Not because I wanted to hide it, because the realization caught me completely off guard. It happened on a random Tuesday. Nothing special. No dramatic moment. No grand gesture. Just an ordinary day. The flower shop was busy. I was helping him restock displays before heading back upstairs to work. At some point, an elderly customer walked in carrying a photograph. Paul immediately smiled. Margaret. The woman lit up. Hello, sweetheart. I stepped aside while they talked. Apparently, her husband had passed away years earlier. Every month she bought flowers and brought them to his grave. Paul knew exactly which flowers she wanted, exactly how she liked them arranged, exactly how much to charge her. Or rather, not charge her. Because after she left, I noticed he hadn't rung up the order. Paul. You didn't take her money. He continued trimming stems. I know. Why? He shrugged. She misses him. Like that explained everything. I stared at him. That's your reason? Seems like a good reason. My chest tightened unexpectedly, because that was who he was. Not just with Margaret, with everyone. The kid who sold lemonade outside the bakery. The exhausted single mom who came in every Friday. The older man whose dog visited the shop daily. Paul noticed people. He cared. Not because he wanted something, not because he expected anything back, just because that was naturally who he was. And standing there watching him arrange flowers, I had a sudden, terrifying realization. I loved him. Completely. Deeply. Without reservation. The thought hit me so hard, I almost dropped an entire bucket of carnations. Paul looked over immediately. You okay? Yep. That was suspiciously quick. I'm fine. He narrowed his eyes. I escaped upstairs before he could investigate further. The problem was that once I'd admitted it to myself, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I loved him. And honestly, the feeling wasn't scary because it existed. It was scary because it felt permanent, like something that wasn't going away. A few days later, Marcus came over. One look at me and he groaned. Oh no. What? You've got the face. The face. The love face. I threw a pillow at him. He dodged it effortlessly. You told him yet? No. Why? I looked toward the window. Across the street, Paul was arranging flowers outside. Even from here, I could recognize his smile, the way he moved, the way he interacted with people. Everything. I don't know. Marcus softened slightly. You love him. It wasn't a question. I nodded. A slow smile appeared on his face. Good. Good? Yeah. He glanced toward the shop. He loves you too, idiot. My stomach flipped. Not because I didn't suspect it, because hearing someone else say it made it feel real. The following weekend brought the annual neighborhood summer festival. Apparently it was a big deal. Food stands, live music, local businesses, the entire street packed with people. Paul's shop was participating, which meant he spent most of the day running around like a maniac. I offered to help, a decision I regretted within 10 minutes. Not because it was difficult, because every woman over 60 immediately assumed I worked there, and every one of them asked the same question. How long have you two been together? By the eighth time it happened, Paul could barely stop laughing. I glared at him. This is your fault. How? You have neighborhood grandma support. I do. They've decided we're married. Paul looked genuinely pleased, which somehow made me laugh too. Late that evening, after the crowds disappeared, we finally closed the shop. The neighborhood looked completely different. Quiet, peaceful, lights glowing softly above the street. Paul locked the door and exhaled dramatically. I'm exhausted. You talk to people all day. Exactly. That's literally your favorite activity. It still counts. I laughed, then noticed he was staring at me. Again. What? His expression softened. Nothing. You're lying. Probably. The silence that followed felt familiar, comfortable, the kind we'd developed over months together. Eventually, Paul reached for my hand. Our fingers intertwined naturally, effortlessly, like they belonged there. We started walking. No destination, just enjoying the cool evening air. At some point, we ended up on the rooftop of my apartment building, one of my favorite spots. The city stretched around us, lights sparkling in every direction. For a while, we simply sat together, shoulders touching, watching the skyline. Then Paul spoke quietly. You know what's funny? What? I almost stopped giving you flowers. I looked at him. What? He laughed. After the first month. Why? Because I couldn't tell if you were interested. I stared at him, actually stared. Paul. What? I literally decorated my entire apartment with them. I know that now. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. You're unbelievable. Thank you. Then his expression softened again. That look, the one that always seemed reserved for me. I was nervous. The admission caught me off guard. You? Believe it or not, I smiled. Then something inside me settled. A quiet certainty. The kind that only appears when you know something needs to be said. My pulse quickened. Not from fear, from importance. Because suddenly I knew I didn't want to wait anymore. Didn't want to wonder anymore. Didn't want to keep the words inside. I looked at Paul, at the man who had changed my life with a bunch of free flowers, and realized I was finally ready to tell him exactly how much he meant to me. I looked at Paul, at the city lights behind him, at the familiar smile that somehow still made my heart race. And I knew I couldn't keep the words to myself anymore. Not because he expected them, not because I felt pressured, because they were true. Simple as that. Paul noticed me staring. His eyebrows lifted slightly. What? I smiled, then laughed nervously, which immediately made him suspicious. Oh no. What? You're about to say something important. I shook my head. How do you always know? Because I've spent months studying you. I laughed. That's creepy. It's romantic. Debatable. Paul grinned, but his expression softened when he noticed I wasn't joking around. The smile faded slightly. What is it? My pulse hammered. Ridiculous. We'd been together for months. I'd kissed him, held him, spent countless nights talking until midnight. Yet somehow, this felt scarier. Because it mattered. A lot. I looked down briefly, then back at him. I love you. The words came out quieter than I expected, But they were there, real, honest, everything I felt. For a second, Paul didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. Then the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen appeared on his face, slowly, naturally, like sunlight breaking through clouds. And suddenly his eyes looked suspiciously bright. Yeah? I laughed softly. Yeah. Paul shook his head, almost like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he moved closer, close enough that our knees touched, close enough that everything else disappeared. I've been in love with you for months. My heart immediately flipped. What? He laughed. Seriously? Months? Months. I stared at him, completely stunned. Paul, what? You couldn't have mentioned that? He grinned. Look who's talking. Fair point. I couldn't argue. Not even a little. For a moment, we simply sat there, smiling like idiots. The city glowing around us, the summer air cool against our skin, and everything felt right. Not perfect, not magical, just right. The kind of right that feels real. Eventually, Paul leaned his head against my shoulder. A simple gesture. Comfortable. Natural. Home. I can't believe it was the flowers, I said. He immediately started laughing. You're never letting that go. Absolutely not. You like the flowers. I love the flowers. There you go. I shook my head, still smiling. The truth was that it had never really been about the flowers. Not entirely. It was about the effort, the consistency, the way Paul showed up every day, the way he paid attention, the way he cared. The flowers had simply been his way of saying what he wasn't ready to say out loud. And somehow, I understood that now. The following months became some of the happiest of my life. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't. We had disagreements, busy schedules, stress, normal life. But we handled it together, and that made all the difference. Autumn arrived. The neighborhood changed colors. The flower shop displayed pumpkins and seasonal arrangements. The bakery started selling everything with cinnamon, and somehow, Paul became even more popular. One afternoon, I stopped by the shop after work. The place was busy, customers everywhere. Paul stood behind the counter, helping someone choose flowers. Then he looked up, saw me, and smiled instantly. That smile, the one reserved only for me, it still affected me every single time. An older woman standing nearby noticed. She laughed, then pointed between us. I knew it. Paul groaned immediately. The woman looked delighted. I told my husband 6 months ago. Please stop, Paul begged. She ignored him completely. You two were obvious. I couldn't stop laughing. Neither could she. By the time I left, half the shop seemed invested in our relationship. Again, some things never changed. Winter arrived not long afterward. The first snow of the year fell late one evening, soft flakes drifting through the streetlights. I stood at my apartment window, watching the neighborhood disappear beneath white. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Paul. Look outside. I smiled immediately, because somehow I already knew. I looked down. There he was, standing outside the flower shop, holding flowers. Of course, even in the snow, even after all this time, still flowers. I hurried downstairs. The cold air hit my face the second I stepped outside. Paul held out the bouquet dramatically. Red roses, white lilies, perfectly arranged. I started laughing. You are impossible. Thank you. Paul, what? We've been together almost a year. I know. You still bring me flowers. He smiled, the same warm smile that had first caught my attention all those months ago. Then he stepped closer, wrapped an arm around my waist, and kissed me lightly. Snow drifting around us, streetlights glowing overhead, the city quiet. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. I'll probably never stop. I laughed softly. Good. His smile widened, and standing there in the middle of our neighborhood, surrounded by falling snow and flowers and the life we built together, I realized something. The free flowers had never been random. Not the tulip, not the daisy, not the lavender, not any of them. They had been the beginning, the first chapter of a story neither of us knew we were writing. A story that started with a florist across the street, a lonely guy in an apartment window, and one small act of kindness, the kind that changes everything.